Hi, I'm Amjad Atallah. I'm the co-director of the Middle East Task Force here at the New America Foundation. And I'm with a very special guest and a friend, Michael Sfard, who is one of Israel's leading human rights lawyers, as well as a property lawyer in essence. Michael has actually represented in front of Israel's equivalent of the Supreme Court many times. He has handled many cases concerning settlement activity. And because the United States has been involved in these discussions with Israel over what a settlement freeze is, Michael has been visiting the United States talking a little bit about this, and he was just at New America and gave a great presentation that you can find on New America's website and follow it. Michael, thanks for being here with us. And I guess the big question from an American perspective is, somehow we find ourselves negotiating with the Israelis, not over a two-state deal, we find ourselves negotiating with them on a settlement freeze.
Right.
And we don't even know what that is.
Yeah, I have the impression that when people use the term settlement freeze, they mean construction freeze. They mean that a brick will not be laid on a brick in the West Bank. If that is the case, then people do not understand what settlement is all about. Settlements is about growth, but construction is only one kind of growth, only one tool to extend the domination, territorial domination. And I'm afraid that if in the bilateral deliberations with Israel, if the American administration would not also address some other types of growth, then the settlement freeze might be in jeopardy. The whole policy might appear untrustworthy for the Palestinians. The reason I'm saying that is because in Israeli eyes, the Israeli settlers have already begun their own negotiations with the Israeli government, and what they are getting from the Israeli government in exchange to a type of freeze is a large and extensive freedom in planning. And one must understand that when a brick is laid on a brick in the West Bank, it is usually a product of many years of planning. And for the last decade, planning was restricted to areas where the Bush administration was not objecting to. And what we're seeing now in Israel, what I'm seeing in the cases that I'm litigating, is that the Israeli government is now ready to enable planning in other regions that were closed before the settlers for a decade, areas beyond the separation barrier, not in the settlement block. Now that would create a huge problem. It will not be a violation, supposedly, of the understanding of settlement freeze, because it will be new housing units on paper, not on the ground, not physically built. However, it will undermine the integrity of the whole settlement freeze project. And for the Palestinians, I suspect, if every now and then we'll hear of a new neighborhood that a plan for was authorized by the relevant planning boards of the West Bank, that would be a deal breaker.
Well, but let me ask you this. You've stood before the Israeli High Court, the Supreme Court, the equivalent of the Supreme Court, and you've argued cases. What is it, what we hear today from the Israeli government is that it's impossible to have a full settlement freeze. It's a legal impossibility in Israel to have a full halt to all settlement activity. Is that true?
That is completely untrue. And it's not even a very complicated or sophisticated legal question because we have precedences. In 1993, the late Prime Minister Rabin has introduced his own settlement freeze, and it was contested. It was judicially reviewed. One municipality and some contractors have petitioned the Israeli High Court of Justice saying, well, we've already invested money, we have erected these buildings, and now we only have to sell them, and suddenly the government prohibits that. Well, the Supreme Court has dismissed these claims, stating the well-known, well-established Israeli legal doctrine that the Israeli government has wide discretion to change its policy, to even break promises, and to decide on construction freeze if that is something that stems out of a new peace process. Of course, that may also result in a right for reparations for the people that were investing money to build new houses. So if that is a claim that is raised by the Israelis in the deliberations with the American administration, that is completely untrue.
Well, okay, so if you were sitting with Senator Mitchell, Special Envoy Mitchell, and he's about to go and meet with Ehud Barak, and maybe he's about to meet with Bibi Netanyahu, and finally come to a head-butting exercise in which they're going to talk about whether they're going to agree or disagree on this. What are the three talking points he needs to go in with on it?
One, Minister of Defense of Israel has full legal power to stop all construction in the West Bank. Two, planning must also be freezed. A freeze of settlement is composed of construction freeze, but also of planning freeze. Three, the Israeli army must protect Palestinian civilians from attacks by settlers. This is something that jeopardizes the whole process. It might ignite fire that will eventually become a huge problem, a strategic problem for any kind of initiative to resume peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians. Ehud Barak has to give the right orders to the military commanders that in their turn will give the right orders to the soldiers on the ground to protect Palestinian civilians, because the settlers have launched their own price tag policy, which means we will attack Palestinian communities whenever there's an attempt to dismantle outposts, so that all energy and manpower will be diverted to stopping that violence cycle.
Okay, one last question, Michael. A lot of Americans, like say in Congress, when they hear the president standing up to Israel on settlement construction or settlement activity, feel that he's putting pressure on Israel. They feel it's not just pressure on the Likud government, or it's not just pressure on the settler movement, it's pressure on the Israeli people and on the Israeli public. In Israel, you live in Tel Aviv,
right.
In Israel, how do people perceive the United States on this issue?
Well, most Israelis, for good and for bad, don't really care about the West Bank as long as it doesn't reach their threshold, as long as there are no terrorist attacks, suicide bombers. They wouldn't go out of their way to save settlements, and they wouldn't care if settlements are dismantled. So I don't think it's such a big deal in Israeli society. I said for good and for bad, they would also not go to the streets to protest against settlement expansion. I think Barack Obama is perceived as a very powerful president that is one of the greatest changes that befallen on the international on humanity, and I don't think that any of his steps are seen as directed against Israeli people. I think the Israeli government understands that there is so much of conflict or clashes with the American administration that the Israeli public will accept.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.